Man releases moose back into the wild, then she returns with a surprise. Have you ever come across a moose? Well, one man knew what he needed to do to rescue a helpless moose, but he had no idea what surprise would be in store for him. As humans, we spend our lives surrounded by animals, although we rarely associate with anything bigger than a pigeon or a domestic cat. However, there are other people around the world who get up close and personal with other beasts, and this man did just that. However, to truly understand this story, we need to learn a little more about the man in question. Erikas Plucas is a Lithuanian farmer who currently lives in the countryside, surrounded by foliage and animals of all shapes and sizes. In fact, Erikas has the pleasure of owning a farm that sits right beside a luscious forest. It's not uncommon for him to see a deer stroll past his window or birds of prey flying above his fields. That's just a part of his life. Erikas has always enjoyed the peace and quiet. He hasn't been one to crave the hustle and bustle of the city and has always preferred to be surrounded by natural beauty. Because of this, he knew that he would eventually want to live on a farm and survive off the land. His dream came true when he bought his farm, but he had no idea that his life would soon turn upside down and that this would be because of a moose. This Lithuanian has spent much of his life around animals, and he's grown to love them as equal living beings that need to be loved and respected. As a farmer, he's come into contact with countless animals over the course of his career, but as a human being, he's welcomed cats and dogs into his homes and tended to horses on his land. However, his knowledge of animals has also taught him which creatures he should avoid. Although one of the main predator to the moose is the human, most people tend to avoid these animals. That's largely because they can grow to huge sizes and have often been known to measure more than 7 feet tall. As if that wasn't enough, male moose also come equipped with strong and sturdy antlers that can prove fatal to those who get in the way. Instead of greeting a moose on the loose, most people will run in the opposite direction. Moose are normally seen closest to humans in regions around North America. However, that doesn't mean that they can't be seen by others across the world. It's believed that there are around 7,000 wild moose in Lithuania, alongside various other large mammals that can be deemed as threatening to those who live in the country. While most people know to leave these animals to their own devices, sometimes this is impossible and people have to get involved. Lithuania is a varied and diverse country and one that offers visitors and natives alike all kinds of terrain. Because of this, many people make their way to the beach where they expect sandy shores, rolling waves, and fellow beachgoers. However, those lounging on Nida Beach in 2014 were startled when a moose and its calf were spotted frolicking in the water. Unfortunately, the sight of humans on the sand put the mama moose into protection mode. Although the moose was cooling off with her calf away from the fellow beachgoers, she felt threatened by the number of people around her. So the moose ran in the direction of the crowds and dispersed all of the people who were watching in wonder from the shoreline. Those who were taking photos and videotaping the experience found themselves running away and telling their friends and family an unbelievable story when they got home. However, Erikas' story is even more unbelievable. Like many other Lithuanians, Erikas had learned not to approach or disrupt a moose. However, he just didn't know what to do when he returned home one day to find a baby moose lying just in front of his gate. The calf seemed in bad shape and the farmer could see that she was injured. Because of this, he assumed that the helpless animal wouldn't be able to harm him, so he approached her with caution to take a better look. As Erikas walked closer to the baby, he made sure to check his surroundings. After all, he had no idea if his mother was lurking in the trees and ready to run towards him at any moment. When he was quite sure that there was no mama moose around, he was able to really look at the calf. Erikas confirmed with himself that the baby was a female moose and that she couldn't have been older than 2 weeks old. The Lithuanian farmer tried to piece together a timeline and wondered how the calf had wandered onto his property. The only story that made sense was that her mother had sadly perished at the hands of hunters and that the calf had to run away to find safety. In the process, however, she must have caught herself on some branches and injured herself. Because of this, she was frightened and vulnerable, and Erikas knew that she had to step in. Although Erikas wanted to do anything he could to save the calf, the baby moose was extremely frightened. She trembled at his touch and she was unwilling to let him get too close. However, Erikas could see the flies infesting her fur and her frail body, and he knew that he couldn't just leave her there. With a huge amount of care and attention, he was able to scoop her up into his arms and take her into the warmth of his farmhouse. When the farmer had settled the calf down on a warm blanket, he began to question his next move. He'd never been in that kind of situation before, so he knew he needed professional help to assist a helpless animal. Erikas called animal services, but there was no way they could get out to him until the following morning. To help him through the night, he rang his friends and family for advice. Unfortunately, he wasn't expecting their negative reaction. When Erikas rang those closest to him, he expected them to be sympathetic and helpful to the idea that he was looking after an animal who was close to passing away. Instead, he received enraged voices and backlash to what he'd done. They told him that what he had done was illegal and that he should have just allowed nature to take its course. Erikas knew that he couldn't do that, so he vowed to nurse the moose back to health. In fact, he found some milk, foraged for some food for the young calf, and urged the baby to take the food and drink. He did this throughout the night until animal services turned up the next morning. However, they didn't give him the information or the help that he needed. They had nowhere to take the moose and suggested that Erikas take the moose to hunters in the local area. This wasn't an option for Erikas. Erikas wasn't going to hand over the calf, as this would certainly result in the end of her life. So he decided to ask animal services a wild question that he never thought he would be asking. Would he be able to keep the calf and raise it as his own? The farmer was fully expecting animal services to say no, and he was over the moon when they eventually allowed him to do so. He decided to call her Emma. In general, the only interaction that occurs between humans and moose is when we hunt them. Mankind is the moose's primary predator. That being said, for the most part, the two species avoid each other. The moose will generally avoid a human unless it's protecting its offspring. On the other hand, humans are wise to avoid moose, especially if there's a baby involved. They're absolutely massive and can do serious damage by charging and ramming us. People told Erikas he should leave the moose in nature, even though moose and man have a long history. Moose aren't usually domesticated, but they can be. There are many cases of people using them for practical purposes. As it's the largest and heaviest animal in the deer family, the moose has captured the imagination of many. The Algonquin Native Americans of New England, for example, believed in a spirit who had the head of a moose, the body of a man, and the wings and feet of an eagle. King Carl XI of Sweden, who lived in the 1600s, actually toyed with the idea of using moose instead of horses for his cavalry. This didn't work as well as planned, though, for several reasons. For one, moose are too smart to willingly get close to gunfire. Additionally, they are pickier eaters than other animals, and finally, they prove to be particularly susceptible to common livestock diseases. Despite the allure of striking fear into the heart of his enemies with these frightening creatures, the moose cavalry plans were scrapped. Although it was later discovered to be a hoax, there is an oft-repeated claim that the Soviets used moose in combat when they invaded Finland in 1940. They never did that, but there is evidence that they did seriously investigate the feasibility of such endeavors. Despite this, the Soviet moose cavalry failed for the same reason the Swedish moose cavalry did. That being said, moose have still proven their usefulness to mankind. Indeed, they pulled the sleighs of Swedish royal couriers. And speaking of couriers, at the turn of the 20th century, decades before the Soviets even thought of using moose in the military, a man named Jack Carr captured the imagination of the public with a story of his two pet moose. Carr was already well known for being one of the best couriers who connected Alaska with the rest of the civilization while the Klondike Gold Rush was underway. Although he was apparently ending his mailing contract, he continued to travel that far up north. On one of these trips, he brought back two moose. Carr found the moose when they were less than a week old, naming them after President William Taft's two children, Bill and Helen. According to a newspaper article, he fed the moose condensed milk and oatmeal until they got bigger. Carr wasn't the only person to make a pet of his moose in Alaska back in those days, with several other notable incidents of moose pets being recorded in the annals of that great state. Nowadays, though, it's illegal to just take a moose and make it a pet. Nowadays, you need to have a better reason to keep moose, like Life Lind's Moose Park, located about 60 miles northwest of Stockholm, Sweden. Lind, who calls himself Left the Moose Man along with his wife, Lind has opened up a moose safari. People thought I was crazy when I told them about my dream to start an elk safari, Lind said. In Europe, the moose is called an elk, whereas in North America, elk refers to another species. My friends, my family, they all said I was mad. The idea started when his cousin, a police officer and state animal control officer, told Lind that a baby moose needed someone to care for it after its mother was killed by a car. Lind was a hunter, and yet he took care of the moose until she died. I cried when she died, but from then I got it in my head that I would start a moose park. I said that to all my friends. What did his friends think? They told me I was crazy, Lind recalls. My wife called me crazy. When the park opened in 2007, few people showed up, but within a few years, people from over 100 countries came to visit the moose. There are only 250,000 in Sweden right now, Lind explained, and only 10 to 12 countries in the world have them in the wild. Some people go to Africa to see elephants, some people come to Europe to see elk. I've just made that easier to achieve. As far as I know, I'm the only person in the world who swims with elks, Lind said. His approach is clearly much different than many other conservationists who prefer a more hands-off approach. Lind said, I come out into the woods and sleep between the calves and their mothers the first day of their lives. They get used to my voice and my smell. As he kisses one of these majestic creatures, it's clear he has a very special connection, just like Erikas. Over the next few weeks, Erikas had to give Emma special care and attention. She had to be fed every few hours, and he had to keep an eye on her to make sure her health didn't deteriorate. Because of this, Emma became extremely attached to the farmer. She followed him around the house and the surrounding fields, and she even wanted to sleep next to him. However, Erikas was conscious of the fact that she was getting bigger as each week passed. Erikas knew that he couldn't take care of Emma forever, so he decided to put a plan into place. Over the course of a few weeks, he would slowly but surely reintroduce Emma into her natural habitat. He would take her deeper into the trees, showing her what food she could eat and how to forage for them, and he helped her to trust these new surroundings. He hoped that he would eventually be able to let Emma roam free. After tirelessly working to help Emma feel comfortable amongst the trees, she began to explore on her own. She'd venture into the woods in the morning and not come back until the evening. Although this filled Erikas with joy, it also worried him. He was like a concerned father, but ultimately knew that this was for the best. Of course, Emma wasn't done with him just yet. She had a surprise in store that would change Erikas's life. In the end, Emma ventured into the forest and did not return. Erikas assumed that she'd permanently left him and her old life behind, and he was happy for her. However, that didn't mean that she had permanently left behind the man who'd saved her. The moose would make her way out of the trees every single day to say hello to Erikas, and she would do so without fail. They had a bond and nothing could break it. Although Erikas was excited to see that Emma hadn't forgotten her home, he was also incredibly concerned for her welfare. The forests were rife with hunters who would stop at nothing to put Emma on their dinner plate, and he couldn't bear the thought of that. In order to combat this, he invited the hunters in the area to meet Emma. He wanted them to get to know her and get them on her side. Amazingly, the plan worked and the hunters agreed that they would keep an eye out for the deer and not hunt her. Erikas was over the moon and he couldn't wait to see his baby grow into an impressive and remarkable beast. He since shared a story to show the world that moose aren't always aggressive and dangerous creatures. However, he didn't know the full story himself, as Emma had a surprise in store for her Lithuanian farmer father. As the weeks went by and Emma continued to live in the wild while making daily trips back to the farm, Erikas began to notice something a little strange about her appearance. Although she'd put on weight since being rescued, her stomach looked significantly more plump. Erikas soon realized that Emma was pregnant and would be expecting her own baby imminently. We can't help but hope the next generation loves Erikas as much as Emma does.